Hey, welcome back to the channel. We're finally bringing back the music and song analysis, and we're gonna be starting off this year with Angine de Poitrine, and the track itself is Fabienk. And this is a band that took the internet by storm because when they released their live performance, everybody was mesmerized and amazed by how weird this thing is, and still how sensical it is as well, because the music is very out there, but it's actually very groovy, enjoyable, and it's actually easy to listen to. So we're gonna be diving in this very track in this very video, so let's get into it. But before we go, if this is your first time on the channel, I welcome you because in here we analyze the music that we love from the perspective of an active musician and professional music producer, but using language that everybody can understand, in a way to expand knowledge when it comes to music production, songwriting, and of course, music appreciation. So, with that being said, now, let's get into it. Here we go. So here we go, Fabienk by Angine de Poitrine. Sorry for interrupting, but you know the drill. Well, that's something else, right? This is far from being conventional. The sound of everything is very interesting. That's due to the fact that they are doing something known as microtonality. Let me give you a little bit more information regarding that particular concept. This concept involves plenty of music theory, which means that it can get very complex, but I'm gonna keep it simple and short. In music, we got something known as intervals, which is the distance between a note and the next one. As an example, I'm going to use the note C. The distance between C and the next neighbor, which is C sharp, is what is known as a semitone, and that is comprised of 100 cents, which stands for slight increments in tuning. Now, when talking about microtonal music, we're going to be doing something that is in between the notes. In our example, if we want to go from C to the closest to C sharp using microtonal theory, we're going to end up with a quarter of a note, which will be the equivalent to 50 cents. All of this translates into music that sounds eerie yet familiar, and also with a little bit of naturality to it, because this approach to tuning is very similar to what we hear in nature. Now with this nerdy stuff out of the way, let's talk about the song and the music itself. It sounds very unique. It's very interesting sounding. I gotta say that the drummer is fantastic. Every single section of the track so far, the drums have been, in my opinion, the highlight of the entire composition. Why? Because they are dynamic, they are very precise when it comes to the performance, and also they are very fun and groove driven, if that makes sense to you. Also, the drummer is very good. I love the sound of his kit, because the way that he's playing is very energetic. It's not just the sound of the kit itself. Well, the sound of the kit itself is not necessarily just the quality of the drums being used, because the performance coming from the drummer is very, very much what defines the tone of a kit. You can be recording a very bad sounding kit, but if you got a proper drummer, that bad sounding kit could sound slightly better, if not almost too good. It wouldn't sound professional, of course, but it's gonna be a huge improvement over the quality of the drum kit. So his performance is excellent. Also, the guitar player slash bass player is very good. Is very, very good. I think when comparing the quality of the technicalities in between the two of them, I think the drummer is better than the guitar player. But that's my humble opinion. Now, when it comes to the harmony, it's very, very clever. It's very fun. And of course, most of us discovered these guys through the breakthrough video that they released a few months ago. And from the video or the footage, I could see that he's using a pedal board, a gigantic pedal board, which is a quintessential part of their sound. Let me explain a little bit more of that. I mentioned that because in the performance, you can see that he's the only one who's playing harmony. And he's kind of layering stuff on top of stuff, or phrases, musical phrases on top of musical phrases. That's because he's using a looper pedal, which, as the name implies, creates loops, musical loops, out of the stuff that you are playing and recording on the spot. But there is a catch to that. Depending on the quality of the pedal itself and also the length of the loop that you're going to be recording, the quality of the sound will vary. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when you're sampling stuff, and that degradation happens when you are recording, you can create texture and artifacts that are quite pleasant to the ear. Let me give you a quick example. Welcome to Logic Pro. This is software used for music production. Here I got a recording of a piano, but I want you to pay attention to this guy over here. This is Lo-Fi AF, and it's an effect that is going to be applied to the sound of the piano. This is an effect that reduces the sound quality and resolution of any given signal, which will give us an effect very similar to what happens with the looper pedal. Okay, now we got that out of the way, let's continue rocking this bad boy. Here we go. Okay, there's plenty to unpack, so let's do it. First and foremost, I want to point out or draw your attention to the sound of certain effects that were used while the track was playing. One of them is known as ring modulation, which sounds like this. As you can see, it's a very weird sounding effect, and it's coming from synthesizers rather than actual guitar pedals. The thing is that it has its uses, and in here you saw that during the second section of the track, he used it plenty. There were several sections of it, of the song which relied on the use of this effect for the lead sound, the lead guitar tone. Another effect that it's important to be also discussed is the use of some form of harmonizer, which is creating on his voice, which is adding that kind of weird several notes at the same time tone to his vocal takes, for a lack of a better term, that are quite present through the moments in which the voice is part of the song. Now, let's talk about the mix. So let's take a look at the screen over here. Or here we got our trusty decibel, which is the tool that we like to use to analyze music through the use of a visual medium. Over here we got the frequency range analyzer, which is the one that is showing us how high in volume each of the different frequencies that are part of our human hearing range were at their highest point, starting from 20 all the way down to 20,000 hertz. Okay? Under 20 is subsonic, above 20,000 is supersonic. Easy. So, first and foremost, the sound of the mix, does it sound bad? No. Do I love it? Yes. Do I think it sounds great? No. Let me explain. I'm mentioning this because the sound of the mix is very much an extension of the sound of the band or the music, if I use different terminology. Because the mix itself sounds quite tiny, not necessarily bombastic, to a certain degree, kind of raw, and it almost gives you this impression of this being a live performance rather than a recording situation. Could it be that they recorded this in one shot? Maybe. Because everything that is going on is reliant on the pedal board and the microphones on top of the drum kit. So chances are that they recorded the guitar without the use of an amp. I don't know. If you happen to know more details about the recording process for these guys, let me know in the comment section down below. But regardless, the tone of the drum kit sounds tiny, even though I mentioned how good the drum player is. The sound of the mix is kind of tiny, boxed in, if that makes sense to you, inside of a box, if I use better wording, rather than this bombastic arena sound that is more common on rock music. And this reminds me of different acts from the 70s and 60s. For example, it makes me think of Captain Beefheart. I already mentioned it in the introduction to this video. Not only because of the weird nature of the music produced by these guys, but also the production itself is kind of inspired by those records from this guy. Particularly this one, I always forget the name of this album, but it's the one with the mask, Trout Mask, if I remember correct. But you have it here in front of you. And that album is weird as all balls. It's very reminiscent to what these guys are doing. And I think Angine is a little bit much more noob-friendly, if that makes sense to you. It's a little bit more approachable than Captain Beefheart. But that's my opinion. Now, let's take a look at the screen once again. We got this gigantic bump over here, which is the low end. And not surprising because the kick drum and the bass itself are quite prominent in the mix. And since we're dealing with a very kind of not that big of an ensemble, we don't have that much of this kind of cluttered sound. Even though we are dealing with layers and layers of different harmonic elements, one on top of each other, they are mixed in a way that kind of blends properly. Again, if they recorded this track using the looper that I mentioned before, the guitar player did a great job with the mix of the volumes of the different samples while performing. Excellent. And it makes sense because the sound of the music itself is not trying to be bigger, larger than life. This is not Pink Floyd. We got this kind of condensed, straight to the point and focused sound that I like because it works for the music. That's why you don't have this huge excitement on this area over here. The drums are kind of dark sounding as well, and that means we don't have that much of a hyped up high end. And we got a warm tone all around because, again, we got plenty of low end energy, but it's not bombastic and overly hyped. Nice, I like it. It's a good mix for the style of the music being produced here. Now, let's take a look at the second section because this is the dynamic range analyzer. And you know that I love this because this is the core of music. And in here, for those of you who are new to this, the dynamic range analyzer is going to show us how loud the track has been throughout time. And in this case, we got the introduction, which is very tiny, minute when it comes to volume, but it ramps up dramatically. Adding this extra excitement when the drums kicked in is remember? Is that section. Now, you see how the track itself is very reliant on the dynamics from the drum kit because every moment on which the drummer goes a little bit more berserk, we see this bump in volume. The mix, from a mixing perspective, it's not necessarily speaking that difficult, not because of the track itself being lame or devoid of details. It's more a testament on how important the performance and the composition itself was before hitting the recording process, because it's very clean. It's very kind of reliant on the performers rather than the mixing engineer to push the music forward. That's good. And actually, that's kind of a rare sight given the current state of affairs when it comes to producing music nowadays. So this is actually very, very much refreshing to see. And you see how much the dynamic range rarely changes because we don't have that much of a difference in vibe across the track. It's basically fun and funky and funnier and funkier, if that makes sense. So those moments on which we see this kind of dip in volume is just to prepare us for the next big section, okay? And one more thing regarding dynamic range, and this is very important as well. When we're listening to music, dynamic range or the loudness of any given track will represent or makes us feel in a different fashion. For example, when something's loud, we feel excitement. When something's quieter, we feel a kind of a personal sound. Does that make sense to you? I hope it does. So, we see here that the track itself doesn't change that much until we reach this final track, this final section of the song. Because in here you can see that we got this little by little increment in volume, energy and performance, attitude, if that makes sense to you, for it to reach the gigantic momentum that was at the very end. Fun, straight to the point, and gotta say clever. This band took me by surprise, not because of them being unique. As I mentioned before, particularly in the introduction, they are kind of a continuation of this very weird avant-garde style of rock music. The thing is that they made it in a way that is very accessible. It's the more accessible take on this style of rock music I have seen in probably ever. And I like it, and I support these guys for that very reason, because the track itself has plenty of moments of actual great musicianship. You saw that there are plenty of moments in which the tempo changes, adding this extra layer of dynamism and also complexity to the music and the composition. But it's all packaged in a way that is accessible to somebody who is not a music nerd such as myself, or a progressive rock nerd such as myself. So, totally recommended. Do I like them, or would I be a fan of these guys? Not necessarily, but I enjoy what they are doing, and I support that very notion. So, with that being said, thank you for joining, thank you for watching, and if this is the first time on your channel, well, consider liking and subscribing to this, because I release these videos every week. With that being said, as every single time that I meet you, I gotta remind you that you should never let anybody tell you what to dream about, and remember that I will see you when I see you.